This presentation by Colusa County RCD provides IPM training for CDFA's Pollinator Habitat Grant Program. California farmers produce over 400 crops, including fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Many of these crops rely on bees for pollination and production. For example, for hybrid sunflower seed production, bees are needed to move pollen from male rows, shown in the center, to adjacent female lines. Without bees, there'd be poor pollination and seed set, as shown in this photo of a poorly pollinated sunflower head on the left compared to a fully pollinated one on the right, showing excellent seed set. As a result, pollinator conservation practices are needed to protect bees on farms, including honeybees and native bees, like bumblebees, to ensure good pollination of crops. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide IPM training for recipients of CDFA's Pollinator Habitat Grant Program to protect bees and other beneficial insects on farms. The goal of the CDFA Pollinator Habitat Program is to provide food, nesting sites, and also shelter for bees on farms to help protect pollinators. This includes hedgerows of California native flowering shrubs planted on field edges, such as this pink redbud, which blooms in the springtime, cover crops like the one on the right shown planted in a walnut orchard, as well as wildflower plantings that can also serve as buffer strips for reducing soil erosion and also for protecting water quality. So flowers, of course, are an important source of nectar and pollen for bees, with pollen fed to bee larvae, as shown here with nest cells packed full of pollen and bee young. Habitat is also important for providing nesting sites for native bees. Some dig out nests in the ground, like alkali bees, which are important pollinators of alfalfa seed crops, as well as bumblebees. And these nests can be anywhere from 5 to 15 inches deep in the soil, with individual cells packed with pollen and bee larvae. Other bees, like leafcutter bees, nest in crevices, like holes in logs, for example, made from bark beetles in the photo on the right, where they pack cells inside the holes with pollen, lay eggs, and then when the eggs hatch, the young bees feed on pollen, as shown in the drawing below of 4 bee larvae that are feeding on pollen grains inside these nest cells. Habitat also provides shelter for bees and other beneficial insects. For example, this is a hedgerow that's planted alongside a tomato field, and the hedgerow helps protect the bees from extreme weather conditions, general farming practices like the use of pesticides, and also predators such as birds. Habitat on farms also supports natural enemies of pests. For example, parasitoid wasps, which are very important for helping to control a number of different crop pests, feed on nectar as adults, so they're bees and they do require floral resources. So for their life cycle, they'll grab a host, like this caterpillar on the upper left, they'll sting it, they'll lay an egg inside, and then when the egg hatches, the parasite, this green larvae shown inside this armyworm, will feed on the host, and then it'll eventually pupate, lower right, and emerge as an adult, lower left, where they'll seek out nectar resources to survive and reproduce and repeat the cycle. Predators, such as ladybugs, which primarily feed on aphids, will also seek out and feed on nectar and pollen, especially during times of prey scarcity. This is a hedgerow of toyon or Christmas berry that's planted next to a processing tomato field, And the toyon blooms in the springtime and then has really pretty red berries in the fall, and it's a native California plant. So the benefits of having this pollinator habitat on farms includes increased bee and natural enemy activity. And this actually does lead to better pollination as well as pest control services in adjacent crops that will help with higher yields and reduce pesticide use and eventually cost savings. To protect pollinators, it's important to use various IPM practices on farms to help reduce pesticide use. For prevention, this might include resistant plant varieties, use of certified seed that's free of weed, pests, and diseases, as well as equipment sanitation, cleaning off equipment, especially soil, for example, if there's diseases or nematodes in that soil. Physical and mechanical practices might include tillage for weed control, traps, netting to prevent insects from getting onto plants, and even pruning diseased plant tissue. Cultural practices could include crop rotation, promoting healthy soil practices like adding compost and really paying attention to anything that might cause soil compaction, and also good nutrient and irrigation management practices that really promote plant health, because healthy plants are more able to compete and against any pests and diseases. And also, of course, biological control, which we talked about, that included, planting flowering habitat for enhancing natural enemies like parasitoid wasps that depend on nectar and pollen to survive and reproduce. And then when using pesticides, it's very important to use selective or soft chemistries that are going to target the pest, like our microbial insecticides and insect growth regulators, to really help protect bees. In addition, when pesticides are used, it's critically important to apply them early in the morning or late in the evening when bees are less active. Also, it's important to avoid pesticide drift, especially on pollinator habitat where bees are concentrating. You have nectar and pollen resources out there, and that's where the bees are going to go into that habitat if nothing else is blooming around them. It's also important to avoid insecticides during crop bloom. You just don't want to apply insecticides to an insect that's pollinating crops. And of course, never spray insecticides on the pollinator habitat. That's where the bees and other natural enemies are concentrating. And it's also important to watch tank mixes. Some of tank mixes with different pesticides could amplify bee toxicity. And then, of course, it's necessary to contact beekeepers 48 hours before a pesticide application to your crop within a mile of the application site if plants are blooming and the pesticide is labeled toxic to bees. If possible, it's also good to have a buffer zone between the crop and the pollinator habitat to help protect it from general farming practices like pesticides and pesticide drift. It's also important to label the habitat with a no spray zone to ensure that it's protected from pesticides and general farming practices like disking, because sometimes these field edge habitats can be accidentally treated with herbicides, and then you have a great loss in the habitat. So when establishing the pollinator habitat, it's really important to control weeds to prevent plant competition and also to help control major crop pests and diseases. And once established, the habitat plants will definitely suppress the weeds, reducing the need for weed control practices. But at the beginning, it is important to control weeds. And wood mulches actually work well for suppressing weeds, especially in perennial habitat along field edges, in hedgerows, and the mulch also helps with soil moisture retention. Some of the most troublesome weeds in crop production include the brassicas, like mustard and wild radish, and also malva, which is cheeseweed. And these weeds harbor a number of serious major insect pests, including lygus bugs, flea beetles, cucumber beetles, and stink bugs that'll move into crops when these weeds begin to dry down in late spring. So these are just really challenging weeds that need to be controlled on field edges, especially when you're establishing a hedgerow, to prevent the buildup of these insect pests on field edges that again will migrate into crops when they've dried down. Other troublesome weeds in and around farms include sow thistle and prickly lettuce, as well as malva, which harbor tomato spotted wilt virus. That's a very serious disease in tomatoes, causing yield losses and this mottling on fruit that's vectored by thrips that also thrive on these weedy hosts. So in addition to supporting bees, pollinator habitat also supports natural enemies for enhanced biocontrol of crop pests. They also serve as filter traps for helping to protect water quality and soil erosion. They help with weed control. They also sequester carbon, and they increase water infiltration. They also provide habitat for songbirds that call the Central Valley home and often feed on crop pests, like this bluebird feasting on a caterpillar larva.